Heyo, welcome everyone to Today in the Scene by Indie Arcade Wave. I'm Joe, your host, and here on In the Scene we dive into what's happening in the arcade space, from new indie arcade developers, arcade owners and operators, and just news in the space in general. Now, I'm part of the team that brought Galactic Battleground to the arcade space about 5 years ago. We've been taking it to arcade conventions all over the country, and that's actually where I met Kyle. So Kyle runs Geeks Mania in Madison, and it's an awesome arcade. It's absolutely huge, and he has some really interesting, unique stuff there that you're probably never going to see at any other arcade. Lots of custom builds, lots of modified cabinets. So let's bring Kyle in here and talk to him. How you doing, Kyle?
How's it going?
It's going great. I'm excited to talk. I know we've been chatting for a few years now, and it's finally working out. So let's get to know more about you. Who is Kyle, and what do you do?
So I uh who am I? I'm a tinker. I'm just a tech that really enjoys what I do now. I started out in computers, doing like network operations, stuff like that, and then kind of fell into the arcading business. I went to arcades a ton as a kid, but uh, we were starting an MSP, a managed service provider, and one of my friends basically told me that um, we should grab some arcades and use the large space we had because we had no use for it, and just started a big arcade apparently.
It's funny how such a small idea can turn into such a big thing because you guys have how many games do you guys have? It's like
Currently on the floor, I think we have about 120 to 150. Um, I think we have 14 pinball tables, four pool tables, air hockey, skee ball, pretty much everything.
I mean you have a huge space. Like I can't even like I feel like using the word huge isn't even like big enough because every time I see your Instagram, it's like you have a picture of this room and this room and this room, and it looks like you're in like six buildings, but it's all in the same collection of games. I when we first met at MGC, I knew you had some cool stuff. You had brought some games in. You had a little booth and everything. Let's talk about how you started the arcade. So you had this space. You started bringing games in, and it just piled, or did you eventually were like, we're gonna just go arcade with this?
So it was weird. We ended up partnering up with a couple people in the beginning to bring a few machines in. I think we had 40 or 50 originally, and we were actually coin op when we started, and it it didn't go the way we all had envisioned it. It didn't seem like it hit well. And oddly enough, I made a trip down to Galloping to talk to Doc Mack, and he basically, he was like, what do you want to know? We went over a bunch of stuff, how he did his, pay at the door arcade. And I think that was 8 years ago, 7 years ago. I came back up, and within a week, we closed the arcade down and transitioned into a pay at the door arcade. And from there, it was the sky's the limit.
Yeah, shout out to Doc. Awesome arcade, awesome guy. Had him on here a couple
Yes.
times. Guy's just full of wisdom. He helps anybody that asks. So shout out to him again. I'm curious about indie games. Obviously, you've got an indie game. We've talked a little bit about Galactic Battleground. Let's hear what you think about all these indie games that are coming out because you're at Midwest Gaming Classic, and I mean the vast majority of them have shown up at Midwest Gaming Classic.
Yeah, yeah. I I enjoy the indie arcade scene. It's a breath of fresh air in the arcade industry because it was very dominated by just a few people, a few big companies up until recently. And the indie wave, like, has jumped into like this indie arcading wave has jumped in. And it's kind of crazy that, we went from like five, maybe six, seven big companies to there's 50, 60 small companies, 30 or 40 medium companies, and actually it seems like there's very few large companies left. Like Namco's disappearing. All these big companies that were, mainstays 80s, 90s, 2000s have just kind of faded away, and these middle ground companies have popped up, and you have a lot of these really great pinball company, arcade companies coming up out of nowhere. Like you said, we picked up one of the biggest first indie games we ever saw, and jumped on it. We actually have their prototype cab and one of their first production cabs. So I love what's happened. It's made it a better space for everybody.
Yeah, the game you're talking about is Cosmotrons, and I've had Shane
Yeah.
and Dave on here. They're awesome guys. Super fun game. It is hard. I'm gonna be real with you. If you haven't played Cosmotrons, it is a difficult game, but once you get comfortable with it, it's a blast. It is super fun. It is very retro, very throwback, and it's just enjoyable to play.
Their
Um,
prototype cab is extremely heavy.
oh, I bet. I bet
I
it's
don't
a
think they never meant for it to be anything other than just like a showpiece, and it's like 3 inches of MDF arced by hand and automotive paint and crazy. Their production cab, the one we have, is made out of fiberglass and weighs a 20th what the main cab weighs.
Yeah, I can't even imagine lugging that thing to shows just to show it off. Because they came to MGC and somebody was like, "You should build more of these," and they were like, "Okay, maybe we will." Let's talk about some of the interesting rooms you have in there. Because like you said, you have pool, you've got some retro games, you've got dedicated rooms. I'm thinking the X-Men cabinet that you have is pretty sweet, and that DDR that's completely see-through. Tell us about some of those custom projects that you did and why you did them in the first place.
I, the X-Men was a labor of love. We when we first started, when we were coin op, we had a 6-player X-Men that was provided by somebody else, and when it left, I got extremely sad. That was the game I grew up with, at Fast Forward in Madison. They had one there, and we used to just dump money into it, and I I missed it, and I found a board from, actually, I think, the original designer online. He was selling it, and I picked it up, and I'm like, I need to do this thing justice. And I started thinking of ideas, and I'm like, it's a dual monitor, but it's a mirrored monitor. How do you get an LCD to do it? And I know there's all these board conversion kits and stuff, and I'm like, I want to make this thing a showpiece. And I started in my attic, actually building it, in my little shop, and I spent I think 2 months hand wiring it, all custom stuff, and like, just decided I wanted it to be the biggest thing that we could possibly make, because the original machine is so small. You get 6 players. If you get some big people around, you're all hunkered in, and there's no room to play. And I guess that was kind of the fun of it in in the original game, but I wanted something more. So, we started designing it, and I had this really big idea of a floating console that even somebody in a wheelchair could roll up to, and it was kind of like, Xavier's Cerebral, and hit the game is in the center is Xavier, and it had all the wires running out to the big huge control console, and with a couple of people, we ended up building the control console. It's free floating. It doesn't seem like it should support the way it is, and then I was like, oh, the only way I know how to reverse monitors without doing crazy stuff is on projectors. And I was like, I'm gonna do 2 huge projectors. And it grew. And then the same thing with the DDR. The cabs are so luggy and everything. And I wanted to have an upgraded one that we could do, like the more, like, what do they do? That it, it was funny. We had some DDR guys in that wanted, like, I think, I can't remember what the software is called, but they wanted the upgraded version so they could add songs and everything. And when I went to go design it, I'm like, you know what? I want to keep a lot of the original hardware if I can. So all we really did was replace the computer, which, to be honest, was just a PlayStation 2. And then I kept all the original audio and sound stuff and everything, and the original pads, and I wanted to make it see through to show everybody, hey, this is still as original as it could be. And it turned into what it is. And that's the same thing. We can make that as big of a screen as we want. We still have it on like a 50-inch LCD, but I mean, that's still way bigger than the original, I think 29 or 32. So it's just a labor of love.
Yeah, I thought that DDR was super cool. I remember keeping up with your guys' Instagram, kind of watching it happen. Watched a couple lives, and it was really cool to see all of those components. And I mean, there's a lot of wires in there. It's cool to see that. Like, I'm thinking of like the Candy N64s and the GameCubes,
Yeah.
and seeing all those old consoles with that. It's such a cool look on that stuff. Let's talk about owning an arcade. Like, there are a lot of people that are watching that want to open their own arcade. They may already have a collection, they may have the idea. I mean, I don't know exactly where everybody's at, right? But they want to open an arcade. So, as someone who's been running one for as long as you have, what advice would you give to someone who's just now about to open an arcade?
Um, Location's huge, and then just understanding that the people seem to come. We when we started, people were just coming in once they heard there was an arcade there. I mean, we were after hour, like people were just showing up. We weren't really advertising, and I think it's just now it's it used to be this nostalgia thing. Now it's becoming, you know, a a driving force of like things to do. There's all these different like free play arcades all over the United States popping up, and all these barcades and everything. Ours is just a traditional style arcade where you might grab some soda and just come in and play. But I if you got the collection, the big thing is just making sure that it's a fun place to be, and it's got that feel. Our place just has that like 80s feel, 90s feel, where you just walk in and you can play with somebody that you've never met before. And that's the one thing that I like we did it for, was just something that there used to be so many around Madison and everything in the 90s and 80s, and it was a big arcading hub. And you just it- it's something that if you have the passion, just you push into it. It's expensive, it's a lot of maintenance. I mean, you can see behind me all the stuff I have for all the maintenance I do. And it knowing what you're working with is important. Having good techs, good people around you. We have a really great team. I have a manager that loves the place, does all this great crazy artwork with everybody there. Everybody is it's just the camaraderie is amazing, and that's the big thing.
I'm hearing it takes a village. Be ready to do maintenance and love what you're doing.
Yes.
Because it is, I mean, it's a huge undertaking. Doc said the same thing. He's like, this is massive. There's so many games. Like, it's gonna take time. You're gonna have to fix stuff. I mean, a lot of these games came out in the 70s, 80s. Like, they're 40 years old or older. They're going to break. So, be ready to fix them. Um, Hard question for anybody who collects anything, really. What are your top 5 games that you have on the floor right now?
I'm a big pinball guy. I think my favorite game on the floor right now, my top game, the Six Player X-Men will always be one of my favorite games. And it just for what it is, what we built is just an amazing thing. Um, you know, uh, it's hard. Um, there's a few pinball tables like I like Iron Maiden pinball is just fun. What Stern's done with some of these new pinball tables is amazing. um Star Trek Next Generation is going to always be one of my favorite pinball tables. It's never going to leave the arcade, no matter how many times it breaks, the glass explodes on it, or it just tells me it doesn't want to work. We're going to keep it working. You know I, Paperboy, it's broke right now. We're working on the potentiometers for it, because it's such a hard game to keep the joysticks running on it, the handlebar running on. But that has always been my like top NES style. Like, it's just one of my favorite games. And then like uh Street Fighter. I it's so hard to choose. I That's why I love arcading. I can sit down at any game, play it and play it and play it and play it through. That's a big thing about doing the maintenance too. You play them all the time, so you got to make sure they work. So we've stepped a lot up lately in like just making sure everything runs good. So I've played a lot of them recently, and then I've stepped away a little bit, so I haven't been at the arcade in the last few weeks. But it's one of those things where I think they're all just so much fun. Initial D. That was the one game that was at Easttown Mall in Madison that like I played all the time. And when we found one, that a set that we could get, the version 3, that was one I jumped onto. So I there's a few, but most of them.
Yeah, I agreed. All of those games are awesome. You had some classics in there and some kind of overlooked games. Paperboy's definitely overlooked, I think. Initial D, amazing. I played the first one for the first time at Galloping Go, super fun. The last time I was at Midwest Gaming Classic, I think it's the eighth version
Yeah.
of Initial D. I played that for like 2 3 hours. Absolutely loved it. Drifting felt incredible on that, and I'm glad that you guys have the third one. That's a great one to have. Are you going to be at MGC this year?
Yes.
Maybe it's yeah. Okay.
It depends on the kid.
Okay. Okay. Um,
But we definitely want to be there. I don't know if we're gonna have a booth this year, but I'm gonna be there.
awesome. Well, I hope you are there. We're going to be debuting a new game there that we're working on. We haven't told anybody about what it is yet. Hush, hush. But it'll be debuting there. We'll have a beta there, and that kind of leads me into my last question for you: is what excites you about the future of the arcade space? Like obviously we talked about the indies and all these smaller companies that are coming in for both pinball and arcade. Where do you really see this space going, and what excites you about the future?
The growth, the fact that it when we started about 8.5 years ago, and like I said, the free play started about 8.5, 7 years ago. I It's grown so much. We were, I think, one of like three arcades, four arcades, in Wisconsin, and now there's 20 or 30 all over, Wisconsin, and then everywhere else. And it's the growth, the, it's the small arcades too. It doesn't have to be very big, 50 games, 40 games, anything. The fact that they're popping back up, pinballs everywhere. You'll find, even multiplayer cabinets in random places are popping up now. It's just amazing that it went from a nearly dead industry where people were throwing these games out. You could buy pinball tables for a few $100s, and big ones too. I mean, Twilight Zones were selling for a few hundred, like $800, and now they're, 10, $15,000. It's amazing that it went from nothing to something again. And I hope it grows like that, and there isn't a boom this time where at the end of the 90s, early 2000s, where it just started dying off because, something about it's so exciting that it's grown back into something that people can be excited about. It's really what it is.
I totally agree. I mean, obviously, like they kind of died off because of the consoles and
Yeah.
whatnot, but now we have the consoles. Now we have VR, we have all this stuff, and they're still growing. So it's cool to
Yep.
see that space. It's the nostalgia of it, being able to have a beer with it. There's so many different elements that have added to it, and it's cool. I'm excited. Hopefully, you are able to make it MGC. If not, congratulations. We know why you're not there.
Yep.
But I really appreciate your time. It was awesome talking with you, Kyle. Glad you were able to get on here. For anybody that's still watching, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us a ton. The way we'll continue to grow. And we've got the new Galactic Battleground cabinets. Don't miss out on those. We've got the 4-player tabletop and the 4-player Konami ready for shipping now. And until next time, peace.